Hi, Sylvia.
Good day, mate.
Good. Nice accent. I'm in a good mood. You know why?
Why?
Because now we don't have to talk about the goddamn war until maybe season 3 of Talking This.
Why
That
is
was
that?
heavy.
Yeah, that was a...
Well, we've prepared much more fun conversation today. But that's important, people had to get some things off their chest. We were meant to talk about something else with Yoni completely and, about some medical stuff and mental health and things like that, but it got a bit off the rails. I think we're both a little bit frustrated.
It was nice to hear about...
And not only sexually.
Well, always that. But, I imagine. But, it's nice to hear a bit of, like, his medical stuff. We did hear a bit of it.
Yeah, don't worry, he'll be back.
But there was a lot of ranting.
A lot of ranting. And we got some feedback here from Pete. Where's that right tab here? Pete says, I listened to the episodes. There were actually lots of smart things said, but as an old soul, I would like to remove 90% of the swearing. But I do understand that it adds to your point sometimes. Sorry, I'm translating this. Pete actually sent this feedback in Finnish. So we know where he is. In addition, I would also like to bring in someone representing the opposite side of affairs, a different opinion. It would be less abstract and just ridiculing the so-called stupid media. Having a nice debate is more interesting than two guys who basically agree. And then he says, as a specialist, I do think that actually brain research has made huge leaps and bounds recently, but I may have misunderstood what the guest said. I think Joni said that we understand as much about the brain as we understand, did he say the large intestine in the 1930s, 100 years ago? Yeah. So it wasn't that controversial. Anyway, Pete may have misheard that. I agree with him.
No, I don't think he misheard it. I think he's saying that we're further on than that.
Yeah, I agree with him with a lot of things. First of all, the reason that there wasn't a counterpart representing the other side is that none of you have volunteered your least favorite neighbor or relative who might hold that side and have some knowledge and stuff. A lot of people in our personal lives think it's kind of intimidating to discuss these things with us because, not to tout our own horns, we do know quite a lot. We don't know everything. We were wrong about things. The longer we chat, the more odds there are that we'll be wrong about a lot of things. So we appreciate this kind of feedback, and yes, we want someone from the other side, but let them send an email, talkingasspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll take it from there. I want to have a conversation with the other side. That's what we're here for sometimes.
I'm not aligned with what you say all the time, am I? But I am not the person to do the big chats with about it. That's why I don't.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Pete. If you want your reward, we still have a few digitized postcards, portraits of me that Sylvia here has drawn. They're a nice little memento for those of you early cult members, early listeners, and they won't be replicated, therefore you will have them, and one day they'll be worth money. Speaking of things that are worth money, the Florida Panthers, if you remember my episode with Pat, Quebec Pat, our French-Canadian correspondent, I picked either Dallas or Florida to win. And when I say either or, that means bet your houses on both. And then what the payout from one would have been enough for you to now have another house on me. So eventually, when this podcast starts some kind of Patreon begging for donations and support and whatever, remember me. Because now, if you have bet on everything I've said, now your house and your summer house and your secret house that your other family lives in, they're all paid for by me. So remember me when I need it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so Florida Panthers won. Nothing else. And that's Puck Talk. Yeah. Shall we call these hockey segments something like What the Puck?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Puck off.
Puck that.
Yeah. Puck that. Exactly. So, today also something fun happened in the parking lot of the golf course.
Oh, no.
I went to play golf with my dog and it was a really hot day and whatever, but I went in the evening. Couple of birdies, whatever, no big deal. Anyway, in the parking lot when I arrived, this group of women who had been walking their dogs up there on the golf course, looked at me, and one of them said, this may have been Karen who sent some feedback earlier to the show. One of them, let's call her Karen, said, oh, it's going to be very hot up there for your dog. And you're gonna be really proud of me, because normally my reaction would be like, what the fuck? That's your dog right there. You were just up there. Why are you in my life? Live your life separately from mine. We're not friends. Why are you talking to me? But I didn't do that. I just said, oh yeah, is it a bit hot up there? All right, have a nice evening. And I moved on.
That's a very good response, Daniel.
Like an adult. Yeah.
Very good.
Some other things that I like doing to people who butt into my business is, another response I love is to go, oh, hey, long time no see, how are you? And I then make them feel really awkward because they don't know where they know me from.
That's a clever one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so stay out of people's business. Today's main topic, Sylvia over here, is going to bring us away from all that nasty stuff and depressing stuff, and we're going to talk about what is it you've prepared for us?
Making love.
Love making.
But I want to address a couple of things first.
Okay.
Firstly, I really liked Levi's episode.
What did you like about it?
I really liked the way they said orange. That's how I say it. Orange. Orange.
Yeah.
Orange. Orange.
Yeah, real American.
They said it really nice.
Yeah, very fun person. Like, you never know when you go into a conversation about something that's so different. Interesting and fun person overall, yeah. So, tell me about today's fun escapism from the state of the world, World War III. And that ain't Steve Bannon saying it. I was saying that for a couple of years already, that's where we're going. No, tell me about how we all escape this misery.
Oh, through love.
Love, yeah. And we have some ancient love-making implements to discuss. So give us a little tour of historical contraceptive methods here.
Well, I've been doing some research, and I am, of course, always going to take a feminist perspective. But the interest in this is always going to be done more by men and about men, because they're obsessed with their penises.
But there's also a practical reason for that. It's a little bit easier to wrap around something around the male part.
I'm not saying like physically doing. I'm saying the history is aimed at what they are interested in, etc., etc. Like what who said?
Simone de Beauvoir said that the act of sex in itself can be oppressive to women because of the male is always inserting and going in. And the woman is viewed as a receptacle or whatever.
Well, that's the thing. That's
read Simone's version.
But if you think about that, that's very missionary approach, isn't it? That's not like modern day. Anyway, I move on. The point is, there are lots of ways in which people stop themselves from having children because everyone ended up doing things with each other. So this would consist of...
So let's start early on. How early are we going?
Firstly, I'll tell you a myriad of items. Sponges, caps, injections, douches, plugs, condoms, pills, elixirs.
I still use all of those.
I thought so. Of course, some of them have developed into things nowadays.
My quick AI search, just to provide like a counterpoint to your research, so I have something to say, because you know how much I love my voice. There was something I read that in Canada, some kind of lumberjacks, at least back in the day, maybe still today, were drinking or are drinking Beaver testicle tea as a contraceptive method. So
there are some testicles. There's a testicle drink as well. Somewhere in my list. Yeah. Weasel testicles, amulets. Just wearing an amulet with weasel testicles, mule's ear wax, bone of the right side of a cat, not the left, Danny. The right side of a black cat. Sorry, because that's very witchy.
As a person who's into astrology and tarot, I wouldn't necessarily ridicule any of this. No offense.
Well, just so you know, guys, the followers of me particularly, I said, I hope it rains today, and there was no forecast for it, and then it did. So there, just for half an hour. Didn't ruin anyone's day.
Yeah, but then I did a sun dance because I wanted to go play golf, and then it was real sunny this evening. So
You win some, you lose some. So going back, so if you wanted, you could be drinking mercury, which really didn't do too much good. There's a lot of drinking of metals in history.
drinking
And-
mercury is a great contraceptive method because that will delete entire generations that could have come out of
Yeah.
you. So, in a sense, drinking mercury, drinking bleach, drinking cyanide, these are the greatest contraceptive methods there are.
Yeah.
Take us back to the earliest
Okay.
contraceptive method you could find a record of on the interweb.
2nd century. Take yourself back to then. So you've done the deed. So then you have to jump backwards 7 times, not 8.
Off a cliff, that'll kill a baby.
And then drink water or from a blacksmith's like bucket
Cool.
that they use to cool their metal. So you know the bucket.
Oh, I see. You know, you could always also drink nowadays. The modern version would be drink out of the cooling pool of like a uranium reactor.
That would work.
See, I brought it back to the fucking war again.
You get out of the war. There's the classic ones that people know, which is using like animal parts or animal like
Animal intestinal lining. Yeah, none of that. Everyone knows that obviously anything that catches the jizz is technically a method of contraception.
Yeah.
It's an early version of a condom. You had the jumping backwards. That's fun.
Yeah, and then it's bladder of goat all the way, and then
before then I can see you have 3000 BC, but that's all that stuff. Bladder of a goat, sheep intestines. That's all the stuff. Fish bladders. That's all the stuff people know about.
Ointments with cedar oil, lead.
When was that?
384 BC.
Okay.
Frankincense, and that was a spermicide, an early day spermicide. Oh, and sorry, Genesis. This is what they suggest in the Bible.
In the Bible?
Yeah. Coitus interruptus.
Well, they weren't speaking Latin, which that is. Would you like me to try to
translate? It's in the book of Genesis as that phrase.
But I'd like to give you the original ancient Hebrew for coitus interruptus, which in modern day lay person's English is pulling out. Correct?
Withdrawal, Danny.
Withdrawing of the penis from the vagina.
Ew. Sorry, I'm also quite prudish.
Vulva.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Excuse my language, Pete.
Twinkle cave.
No.
Hey, Pete
I'm
said...
not playing this.
Pete said 90% of the swearing.
Well, that was that was about 1%.
Not even close to 10% of the previous episode. So coitus interruptus, pulling out, is from the Old Testament, yes. Good, you saying Genesis, I believe you. Yeah, Genesis 38, don't care. But...
We don't care.
So in Hebrew, you would call it Maseh el veonan. And the act of and onan, which is basically pulling out, is the same. It's the act of onan, is the same as onanism, which is the same as masturbation. So pulling out is no less of a sin than masturbation. Because you're spilling your seed, you see?
Well, it's a sin. Hey, are we talking about sins?
Onanism comes from Onan, the character. The character in the Bible. I don't know what the character arc is.
Except you, apparently.
No one knows before this except me. But Onan is, I don't know the character arc of Onan. Since it's the Old Testament, I'm guessing he died a violent death at the hands of some kind of bear that God sent to kill him. But that is onanism, comes from that, and that's masturbation. So pulling out is masturbation if you're a believer, right? It's spilling your seed, doing the act of air and onan.
Yeah, basically withdrawing, not doing it inside. Thank you very much. Here we are.
But it's nice that I got to give a lecture in
the etymology of a word.
Yeah, I'm a linguist, and also I'm actually an expert on biblical archaeology as well.
Apparently so.
We will have an episode. I'm looking for a good counterpart.
Are you going to do it on the first series or the second series?
What, the OG or the sequel of the Bible?
Yeah.
No, when it comes to the sequel of the Bible, the New Testament, there's actually like that's so recent that the archaeological evidence isn't as contested and fun.
You should do it on Return of the Jedi. That's a really good part.
Okay, so what's fun in biblical archaeology early on is that at some point it becomes real. Not the Bible, but the places and the people become archaeology. And there is a huge point of like, obviously, there is no archaeological evidence of a huge Egyptian army on horseback and carriage in the bottom of the Red Sea, right? But not that long after the story of the Old Testament, there's suddenly, you can visit these places now and see ruins from that era in the places where the Bible said they would be. So that like entire intersection of where it turns from mythology to archaeology is actually really interesting. And
That
I'm
is,
looking
yeah.
for, yeah, I'm looking for the right guest because I studied a little bit of this because it is fascinating. It's like real life Indiana Jones shit.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, where mythical stories happen so close to reality and with people that potentially and very likely existed, depending on who we're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Did the Trojan horse situation happen? I think it did, didn't it?
Yeah, so the Trojan War happened. There is no reliable evidence of the remnants of a horse, but you see, you haven't read the story because the horse was most likely made of wood.
Well, that's what I mean.
And wood, notoriously, is organic material and survives very poorly in archaeology. So lots of things that were made of wood may or may not have existed where they were said they were, because
But did it happen? Did they like conceal themselves in something?
nobody knows. We'd have to find out if there were any stone parts of that horse, like if the horse's head was made of stone and we found a massive stone horse's head from the right period, then we could prove it, right?
We just want like a plate where he wrote it down or something, G-Man or...
Yeah, but I mean, written sources aren't any more evidence that this is the earliest time that the myth started. It depends. So here's what in archaeology, what is really trustworthy and stuff is that written sources that were kept by, let's say, tax authorities, like the king's scribe was keeping things like who owes him how much money. If there we find that this guy owes the government this much for getting to take a piece of stone from a horse's head that was used to try to invade our city, then that's a like that.
That'll be
Then
the
you go
dude.
for
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's the smoking gun. Then obviously it was true, but it depends on what evidence you find. So, for example, with I don't know how we got to archaeology here, but this is archaeological stuff. Like these condom stories and fucking drinking mercury stories, there must be some kind of evidence. In a moment, we're gonna get to the stuff that there's written, relatively modern evidence of. But let me say one more thing. Like in archaeology, which by the way we brushed on in the previous episode as well, is certain things that may seem like nothing to the layperson are massive discoveries. From the shape of a tooth, a fossilized tooth that's found somewhere in Africa, usually, you can make inferences that are almost undeniable, that are almost like certainly true. From a certain type of tooth, you can make inferences about the shape of the jaw. The shape of the jaw tells you most likely about the size and shape of the head. The size and shape of the head tells you about the size of the brain, and also about whether or not that type of head could have been mounted on a bipedal animal. So, for example, you can then make very quick inferences on whether that tooth came from a bipedal or a quadrupedal animal. So in human evolution, for example, that's very important, whether this is an early chimp that mostly moved on four legs, or whether this is something that really moved close to how we move now. And then you can also make an inference on what it ate from the teeth, depending on how lucky you get with the quality of the fossil and so forth. So yeah. Now, after that fucking erotic interlude into archaeology that got everyone all hot and flustered, tell us 1800s fun contraceptive method.
I can go to the 1700s first, which is like using an empty half of a lemon as a...
What, eating it or
No,
shoving it up?
cervical cap. Like the domeness of it was good.
to shove it up the hoo-ha.
Yeah, I mean, it's good for someone, isn't it? And it might not be the lady, especially as it's lemon. Ouch.
How much more acidic is a lemon than the vagina?
Then the pH of a women's part is very important, isn't it? It's got its own like micro ecosystem.
Certainly for the men eating it. What?
Danny.
Yeah.
No.
I love how Sylvia checked whether the recording was still on when I said that, as if I wouldn't put that out publicly.
That's such a shame that you're that guy. That's all I'm saying.
What guy? The guy eating the
No,
lady
don't eat
part.
anymore.
But eating
Stop
it.
eating it.
What? You meant to eat it.
Don't want you to eat it right now while you're talking about that.
Okay, all right, next one. Apologies to everyone out there, except I don't apologize for the act, only for talking about it right now. The lemon ride, shoving it up there, not great. Could be uncomfortable.
There was lots of other ways of doing a plug, like literally someone would do wooden blocks, as I noted earlier, but also chopped grass and cloth, bamboo tissue, and then another one would be wadded up wool.
This is all shoving up there.
Linen rags.
This is all putting up.
Yeah, a plug. And then also for apparently Jewish women in the olden days, sea sponge in silk attached to string, which someone on the internet said would be effective.
Not the greatest
still
time.
Used sometimes.
Not the greatest time in history for the phrase apparently Jews do something. Yeah. Quite a lot of trouble has started on the internet with phrases like that.
It was like a cultural, like norm in a certain group of people.
So we have definitely moved in history. Knowledge has developed somewhat from early things that had to do with eating poisonous stuff or eating magic stuff that they believed might do something, except in Canada, where they're notoriously behind history, where they did the testicle tea very recently. But mostly the fun things that you have researched have gone later on in history into wrapping something around the cock or putting something in the vagina.
It links with politics and the idea of whether it's okay to do it. Number one, for reproduction. Number two, for pleasure, which often people don't want people doing, if you're a girl anyway. And number three, their understanding of how reproduction happens is developing with it. So it was only in 1827 when someone realized that there's actually an egg in the woman.
It's called the Enlightenment. This is when like the scientific process starts to sort of figure itself out. A lot of people had to die to make that happen. But yes, this is when the 1,000 years of darkness, where the Catholic Church ruled Europe, where some ideas start to be closer to something we would be doing than the early ones. What about during those 1,000 years of darkness, in the Middle Ages? Because a lot of fun stuff is from, I see dates that are BC or barely AD.
I know there's a big gap, but that is your classic sheep's intestine, bladder of a goat.
Yeah.
Type stuff.
And the church didn't allow any of it, so therefore the development of them was probably a little bit slower, and you couldn't experiment in the same way, or at least not write and tell others about what you've been experimenting during the Dark Ages.
I think it was common that people did it, wasn't it? It was.
What, sex? Yeah, that was pretty common because the human population.
No, I mean, okay to talk about. Yeah.
In ancient times, sex was okay to talk about, and then where a lot of your examples come, I see your timeline there. Then starting from 16 something, 17 something, 1800 something, that's when it became again slightly more and more okay to talk about things.
1873. What's that?
Comstock Law, 1873. What's that?
Do you know what that is?
Nope.
Oh, it's not allowed to sell. It's basically, you're not allowed to sell contraceptive products. It was all getting too out of hand. So then it was all under the counter.
And what happens in 1886?
They make a suppository.
So that's a major development.
Yeah. But then in 1914, there was a lovely lady called Margaret Sanger who decided actually we need to make a bit of choice, freedom of choice. and she coined the phrase birth control. And she sort of was still facing like the
You may be the Earth's most confusing timeline follower. Between 1886, when the suppository was invented, before then 1873, we had the Comstock law about not being allowed to sell contraceptives. In 1914, you've written Margaret Sanger.
She coins the phrase birth control.
Okay, but she didn't invent the pill then or anything.
No, that's the 60s, literally.
Yeah, I know.
but it was all the way from 1886, all the way through the 30s. Don't know when it ended, but all the way through that, this law was still in place.
Okay. And if we know anything about Britain, that law is still in effect.
Probably. Yes. Started to have rubber in the mid 1800s, so that started to become a thing. But yeah, the attitudes towards contraception was well off, because in England it was Queen Victoria, and she wanted everyone to have big families like hers because that's a strong Britain.
And I'm pretty sure you're not gonna do it, statistically speaking. But technically, once you fall in love with someone and the birds and the bees and all that, then you should have 9 children. What does Sylvia say about that?
You're mad to think anyone needs your opinion on it, on whether they have kids or not. Number one.
Oh my. If people don't need my opinion on things, then what the fuck are we doing here?
I know, exactly.
This whole enterprise is that there's a whole cabal, some call it a conspiracy of people who think that the world needs my opinion on things.
There's also a cost of, I'm just going to ignore that, but there's also a cost of living crisis. So the reality is that people can't afford it, like yourself. And it's becoming harder to.
The fucking banks have all the money.
And butter is £2, and so is a chocolate bar, £2.25 for a large dairy milk. Everyone in England.
Yeah.
But
you can't have kids. I know.
One of the things I wanted to just mention is that 1961, not really that long ago for the pill, that's something that gives women freedom. It was banned a lot because of that, and then brought back in when people saw the light-ish. But it is quite it can be a cost to a woman's health essentially as well, with all of the impact it can have on you. It's not side effect free. But one of the things that I just noticed in terms of like who is not a winner in this, other than it just being women, but when you do have kids or want to give birth, we're still at a stage now where women from ethnic minorities, and particularly black women, are 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy or in the first year of their child's life.
Why is that?
In the UK. And
that's a crazy statistic.
Yeah. And it's absolutely founded in truth.
Wait, founded in truth. I believe that it's true. It's fine, but why? So what's the reason for actual? Because in British hospitals, so childbirth deaths in British hospitals, I imagine there would be an outcry if they treated different races any differently. So how come?
But this is the reality of it. So firstly, how are they dying? The cardiac disease, epilepsy, stroke, diabetes is like overrepresented, but also like thrombosis. So it can either die like during childbirth or in like the first 6 weeks or in the first year from unmonitored, like things are not noticed and picked up on. And the why is a mix, of course, of all sorts, but also I would believe it involves racism. Like in the report that Embrace UK did, they found that improvements in care may have made a difference to the outcome of death in 38% of those women. And also there's a mention of like the implicit and explicit racism. So microaggression, like black people have lower pain thresholds, is often thought of in.
I've never heard someone say that they think
I wasn't aware, but that's apparently a thing. There's an overrepresentation of black people having multiple complex problems, and the communication between services is for some reason lower. And also maternity care is often given in a one-size-fits-all, which means that many of the issues picked up on aren't collected. But yeah, it's not really a clear answer.
Yeah.
It's just not a good one.
Okay. That is an excellent public service announcement, something for all of us to think about. I have a double one, actually.
Don't overcompensate. You don't need to.
Because yours was so good and well researched. I don't get to have two. No, I have two. Number one is press the internet buttons and do the whole thing where you share with a friend. Like, listen, here's something I torture myself with every ever so often, and maybe you should too, because life is too short not to have a painful conversation in your ears every once in a while. And also, Canadians are a massive. Did you know this, Sylvia? Canadians are a massive group of listeners. So, any Canadians who may or may not have drank Beaver testicle tea for contraceptive purposes or just for the delicacy of it, please send emails to talkingasspodcast@gmail.com, and guaranteed anyone who has done that gets to be on the show. A full dedicated episode of just that experience and the reasoning behind it. My second one is, if you ever walk up to a slightly sweaty and uncomfortable looking fat man with a dog in the parking lot of a golf course, then mind your own fucking business, okay? And we will see you in a few days. Bye-bye.